Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's July, so that means budget workshops. So we're going to have a presentation from Brian Battles, our Deputy CFO today, but I'd like to thank Commissioners, your leadership over the last several years. We've made very tough budget decisions that has allowed our city to remain on strong financial footing even during the course of the worst economic recession since the Great Depression, and state-mandated help with property tax reforms, but we remain one of the strongest cities financially in the state, as reflected through our credit ratings, which are some of the very highest of any city in the state. Last year, we were fortunate to experience increased revenues based on the growth in our economy. We were able to invest in our parks, public safety, and infrastructure without raising the millage rate. This time, I'd like to have Brian give us our first intro to this year's budget.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. How are you all doing this afternoon? Hopefully, you'll entertain this budget update. At this time, this year is kind of a little bit different than some of the previous years, where we still have a couple looming budget conversations to have over the next couple months. So this is more of a draft, an update, and you'll hear from at the end of kind of the next steps in the budget calendar. So at first, I want to just briefly touch on the historical perspective, and really at this point, I wanted to start on the current budget that we're in right now. Last year and for the previous years before that, we talked a lot about what we'd done over the years, some of the cuts that we had made, some of the programs that we had deferred, and to kind of get us back to a normalcy that we occurred in the current year, the 15-16 budget. There's also been quite a few, as you know, we have the Budget Review Committee meeting that meets monthly, and all those resolutions and amendments come to sit before City Council. So I wanted to talk about those because those have been a little bit on the more significant scale in this current year, and it kind of builds on where we're starting from the baseline for the 16-17. Obviously, I'll talk about general fund, as well as I've done something a little bit different this year, and I have some select other funds rather than the department level other funds, and then again, the budget calendar for next steps. So first, I just talk about the principles that we developed last year. The property tax revenues themselves, we're back to the pre-recession levels. Again, that's just the revenues, that's not the tax base. We recognize revenues, as the mayor said, from increased economic activity. We restored our infrastructure and facility maintenance funding back to those pre-recession levels. We increased staffing where economic conditions demanded, such as permitting and some of our survey and public works areas that are related to that economic growth. And then we increased our contingency levels. For a while there, we were right around about $1 million. In the current budget, we went up to a $4 million approximate number. Again, from a dollar figure that we're talking about for this is, again, the current year, 15-16, is roughly about $1.1 billion. You can see the split between general fund of 400 and other funds were about 700. Some of the program enhancements that we've been able to experience, again, this has been able to us to enact programs mid-year and really respond to the citizenry on the programs that they're calling for, as well as recognize some new revenue opportunities. So as the first one you'll see, in the course of the last 6 months, we've recognized about 13 new grants totaling more than $1.6 million. So a lot of those have been related to the Orlando Police Department, but we also have some money from Orange County for some Lock Haven Park improvements, as well as the OCPS Food and Nutrition Program. So we are, again, as you'll notice, usually we don't budget the grants during the normal adoption, and we want to make sure that we get the signed agreements before we come forward. But 1.6 is a pretty great number to talk about just in those first basically half of this year. We expanded our right-of-way maintenance and our litter control programs by adding some additional crews. We're able to focus on some of the project DTO, including the Constitution Green purchase. We started the weekly recycling pilot program, as well as some other public works projects such as West Livingston Street and Iron Bridge. So those were the programmatic enhancements. I wanted to highlight also a couple of the staffing enhancements, because again, this builds into our baseline budget. As part of the union negotiations, we were able to reclassify emergency communication workers. We also added a few positions for such as an after-school all-stars director, again funded from a grant. As you'll see, the biggest increase in staffing related to these budget review committee meetings was permitting services, where we added roughly about 25 new positions. a couple other positions throughout the city. As you'll see, almost every single city department had some type of increased staffing or new focus of staffing throughout this given year. Which brings me to where I'm at today to give you the 16-17, essentially a tentative budget summary, an update. Again, we're keeping the programs that we restored, as well as we're incorporating the interim enhancements. We're again showing revenue growth from economic activity. We're including the full actuarial required contributions to all three pension funds and OPEB. And we've also set aside funding for a cost of living adjustment in the general fund, similar to how we have in the previous contracts. Because again, that's probably one of the biggest things that we'll have to work out through this next budget is the contractual negotiations with our bargaining units. And again, the next couple slides will go a little bit more detailed into each of these sources, but I did want to just show from a total perspective, the total revenues are up 5.3%. Most of them are pretty consistent around those couple percentage points. The three at the bottom, the charge for services, other revenue, and transfers in, are really more of a bookkeeping entry of how we're essentially charging some of the external departments, as well as recognizing some of those new programs when we've gotten support from, let's say, solid waste or stormwater. Our property tax numbers, again, came in very favorable for 16-17. Our taxable base rose 9%. So our net new taxable value, which is essentially what we usually refer to as new construction or additions, was $640 million. I would point out that last year that number was over $1 billion. So as we're still experiencing significant growth, it still is not as high as we experienced in the last budget cycle. And also the exempt amount is increased by almost 11%. This tentative budget and projection does maintain our current millage rate of 6.65, but does recognize the growing base. And I did want to point out again, last year we had this conversation, but without the millage increase from a few years ago, the revenue would still remain below the peak year. So our peak base is still roughly a couple $1 million off what it was in 2009 from a revenue number. And that's what you'll see from the light bars and the dark bars. Utilities and communication service tax, again, communication service tax is the one that's kind of causing the slight decrease here. It's not as substantial as it has been in the past, but we still wanted to recognize that this is a trending down revenue stream. It could be mitigated by some of the growth that we are experiencing, because a lot of businesses and different entities still need some landlines, which is what this is driven from. So even though we are seeing general population going more to the wireless, we still do have some wired communications, which is probably why the drop isn't as drastic as what we've seen in some of the past couple of years. Sales tax, this number is based on our OMB estimate. We actually just received the state estimate a couple of weeks ago. Their estimate is a little bit higher than ours, about $1.5 million. Last year, we experienced something similar, so we're going to continue to fine tune this number, but we're pretty confident. As you see, there is we're still recognizing over $1 million, almost $2 million in growth from this revenue stream, even with our lower estimate than the state's. Municipal revenue sharing. This increase is mostly related to, for the past couple of years, as you see, 13, 14, 15, 16, it all has very small increases. So because of our conservative revenue estimating, we've kind of been below where we've actually gotten those receipts. So this even though the 16 to 17 looks like a larger jump, it's really just kind of normalizing where we've been below. And again, that estimate from the state hasn't come out yet. So we'll be keeping our eyes open for that to see how closely we're tracking to what they think we should receive. Local business tax, again, one of our kind of economic focused ones. In last year, if you can remember, we had a pretty big jump from 15 to 16. This year, we still think we're going to continue that upward trend, but we didn't want to predict such an increase, especially when our actual collections are coming in similar, right around kind of that mark. So we did have a small increase again, but not the jump that you saw from 15 to 16. OUC franchise dividend. This is the last year of our agreed upon, essentially contractual or agreed upon numbers with OUC. So if you recall, a few years back, they had a couple different numbers. This is 3 million from 15 to 16. Again, another 3 million from 16 to 17. So we have that included in these numbers. On the expenditure side, again, this is the basically baseline budgets for all these departments, with the addition of fully funding our actuarial required contributions, which does lend to a decent amount of these increases, as well as if any of the departments received any of those new positions or reclassifications for programmatic changes throughout the fiscal year. Again, as a whole, we're only at 5.33%. The non-departmental one at the bottom is related to kind of that placeholder for our cost of living adjustments, as well as when our property tax grows, our tax increment payment to the CRAs grows as well, and that's all within that non-departmental area. The other one that I wanted to point out, just because the percentage calls attention to it, even though it's a small dollar figure in the overall scheme of things, is the housing department. This is really, again, more of a bookkeeping entry of how we're charging or how we're allocating out our defined benefit and OPEB contributions. Previously, the housing department, because again, most of them are grant funded positions, we didn't allocate any cost related to those. Now we're choosing to allocate it so we can get kind of a accurate representation of what the staff and the housing and the overall cost of the housing department are. But again, we've provided the budget on the general fund side to support that. So from an operational standpoint, the housing department, it won't have any cuts or anything like that. It's business as usual. It's more just, again, how we're charging and how we're budgeting those costs related to those contributions. Total budget looks very, very similar as it has in the past. As you'll see, public safety still is over 50% of our budget. Just again, from a property tax standpoint, it's almost $80 million more than what we collect in property taxes. I know that's a number that we've talked about in the past, so I wanted to bring it up again. But we're continuing our focus on those areas as seen by both the graph and the contributions to those departments. So on the other fund side, some of the things that we did last year we're able to do again. So in this tentative or draft budget, we've built in, we have not included an inflationary fee increase for wastewater or solid waste. The CRA has been a beneficiary of the property tax growth, but almost all of that new growth is focused on Project DTO implementation from a budgeting standpoint. We do have some increased capital investments, some of the enterprise funds, as well as some transportation projects through impact fees and gas tax when you look at year over to year. And building code, the mid-year adjustments, as well as the second phase of EDIS funding is included in this tentative update. So these are just a few of the many funds that we have that are not general fund, but I know these are the ones that we get the most questions about in our office. So I wanted to just put out some of the numbers for you to see. As I touched on building code CRA, you can see some of those decreases. EMS is more of how we're actualizing, and also last year, if you recall, we talked about the Medicaid, Medicare, and how that billing is occurring. So this is us just kind of still trying to get those numbers closely in line with the activities. The GOA number I wanted to point out too, because they're still actually in trying to determine how they want to proceed. But originally when they proposed or when they requested a budget, they were trying to increase their police presence. So this budget, in the budget that we sent to them, does include additional officers related to GOA. And as you see down there, transportation impact fees was a pretty substantial jump. That's related to basically a $5.5 million Narcoossee widening 528 to 417 project. Then the other one I wanted to point out, because it was going down, but that's not really indicative of what's happening with the operation, but is the wastewater fund. Last year there was a capital project placeholder that stayed in this fund of roughly about $4 million. So if you take that placeholder out, which hadn't been used, it really is a slight increase, and overall their capital improvement plan is actually increasing for the wastewater operation. So even though you're seeing a decrease there, that's more just because of how we set up the current year budget. And this is just a pie chart for those select funds. As you see, they total almost $370 million for these funds that I wanted to bring attention to. Which brings me to, at this point in time, we do have a tentatively balanced budget. So in this budget summary, in this budget update, we're constantly, as we're refining the cost associated with all of these funds. Anytime we change any of the expenses or revenues, we go through a rebalancing effort. We will continue to do that, but at this point in time, we have been able to get the numbers to align revenues and expenses for both the general fund and all of our other funds. Total budget, roughly about $1.18 billion. So the general fund is about a third of our budget. Those other select funds are about another third, and then we probably have about 100 funds that make up the following third of these budget figures. So before I get into the calendar, I know I rolled through that budget summary fairly quickly, but I wanted to make sure I took a chance here to see if there was any questions about the numbers before we get into kind of next steps.
Okay, questions or comments at this point? Commissioner Sheehan?
Yeah, Brian, I did see that there's opportunity for commissioner, briefings, and I think, I'm not going to go into, nuts and bolts of it right here, but I think it is important for us to be able to ask questions about, the specific line items and stuff like this, because this is the first time that we've seen it. But thank you for putting together a very concise report, but I think we all have more questions, so I'm glad that we're going to be able to have some briefings in the future. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, and we wanted to just kind of schedule the briefings in a little bit. I think it's at a different time frame than we have in the past, and as we've laid out on this calendar, it's kind of the month of August, mainly because, again, there's still some unknowns. And in the past, if you recall, when we do our September hearings, most of the script or the statements are, we haven't changed anything from the past. This year, there could be those changes, so we want to make sure we can continue to have those updates.
Commissioner Ings?
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, I just had one question on your select funds expenditures, page 19 of the tentative budget.
Yes, sir.
The EMS transport, the decrease of $1.5 million. Could you explain that just a little bit, why that decrease?
So this is really, if you go, it kind of is a history of, if you go back many years, the budget was somewhere around $6 million, $8 million, and then we jumped it up to like 20. And again, if my math or my numbers are wrong, you guys can correct me. And so then last year we basically brought it back down because we were recognizing full revenue for Medicaid and Medicare and some of those other charges that we were never going to get. So even though the billings were there, the bookkeeping was there, and we were budgeting accordingly, and then we were having this huge write-off. So this is kind of the second year of writing that fund's true balance of what we really think we're going to get, or what we're going to be able to bill, or what's a real revenue. And I think you heard from George McGowan a few meetings ago, but I think internal audit is also going through an EMS billing audit, which should even help fine-tune these numbers even further. So.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stewart?
Thank you, Mayor. On page 19, the thing that catches me always by surprise is health care. I'm assuming that the health care cost change of 6.7% really represents much of us going into self-funding, in a sense, many years ago. But I'm also assuming that amount is only for general revenue funds and not for the specific enterprise funds. Is that correct?
So this healthcare fund here is for all of the city, the entire city.
All entire city?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So it's at 6.7, which is, I think, good, don't you? I mean, I know that I'm seeing healthcare costs at my office, it could be 12 or 13%.
Our general fund, our healthcare budget went up around approximate $2 million. But I will say, even with these increases, I know, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, some of the presentations we've seen from HR and the health of how our experience has been with health, with going self-insured, and just our city staff and the healthiness of our group has kind of kept those. So even though you're seeing those increases, I think those are probably smaller increases than what a lot of other people are seeing. So I would agree with it.
That's
your
exactly what I'm
statement.
saying,
Yes,
is that we're seeing it at my place at 12 or 13%, and maybe even higher in some occasions. So I think we've done a good job kind of control those costs.
We've had a really good experience since we brought it in-house. Last year, we were actually able to give a premium holiday in the month of December to all the employees, which I think was pretty deeply appreciated, but it has been really good. And the health of our workforce has been the driving factor. Everybody's taking care of themselves. If you have a healthy workforce, you have a happy, productive workforce.
Yes, good.
That's
all I have, Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you'll be able to get as deep into this budget as you want to, really more during the month of August. I know that usually we do some of the deep dive before July, but the schedule's just a little bit different this year, but you'll have the opportunity to go line by line with Brian if you want to, so more to come. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
You want to go through the schedule?
I just to piggyback on what you just said, Mayor, so at the next meeting on July 25th, the mayor will kind of outline the higher level priorities and the programs that this budget accomplishes, as well as we'll have a vote at City Council to set the tentative millage rate, which again, we're suggesting to maintain the same. August, we'll have briefings, and then we have our 2 public hearings, which I know you've received calendar updates for, but September 15th and September 26th. So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Mayor, can I recognize the staff out there?
It is. Brian, you want to recognize everybody and remind us what roles each of them play?
Sure. And I do want to say also, from this year, you probably won't recognize any of the faces, except for Martin and myself. And the main reason for that is because we had 3 promotions from the Office of Management and Budget to other city departments. So the Fire Department, Public Works Department, Orlando Venues were all beneficiaries of OMB staff. So we do have a new group that's worked with our departments. And again, the departments spend a lot of time, as you know, for 6 months working these budgets. But you guys just want to stand as I call your names. But first, I'll go from. I'll start. Yeah, I'm thinking if it's. I'm like left or right. First, we have Amy Kessel, and she's got Public Works and the Fire Department. Ricky Vanderhoff, who has Families, Parks and Recreation, and Office of Business and Financial Services. Rashad Jackson, who has the Police Department, Orlando Venues. Jason Vojkovic, who has Economic Development, Housing, right, and Executive Offices. So if you guys have any questions, he's your man. But again, Martin and I would be happy to help. And then Martin Carmody, our Budget Division Manager. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that concludes our budget workshop for today, July 11th, 2016. Okay, we're going to go right into agenda review for July 11th, 2016. I do have an appearance request to speak on a consent agenda item, and that is Amanda Gifford to speak on item C20.
C20.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Council, City Council Commissioners.
If you'd state your name and
My name is
address.
Amanda Gifford. My address is 1747 DePaul Avenue, Orlando, 32804. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak with you today, and more importantly, for your service and dedication to our beautiful city. I'm here as counsel for Mr. Keith Ori and Mr. Robert Lowe, who are sitting over here today, and you'll hear from Mr. Ori shortly. In regard to Crooked Lake Renovation LLC's revert to plat application at 424 Delaney Park Drive, and the MPB's denial of that application on May 17th. In follow-up to my letter that I sent to the council dated June 3rd of this year, and the comments you're going to hear from Mr. Ori as well, I'd like to touch on a few points which I believe support my client's request to the council that the MPB's denial be overturned, or at the very least that denial be remanded back to the MPB for further and reconsideration. Specifically, as you may be aware, the MPB's denial in this instance is a non-appealable matter, so my client's only recourse is to seek the council's overturn or remand of that denial. Now, the basis of our request would stem from the matters to which Mr. Ori is going to speak here in a minute, but also to the fact that the MPB's denial of any revert to plat application is quite unprecedented in recent times, regardless of the staff recommendation. In fact, the information learned from the Planning Division reveals that in the past year or so, there's been 9 revert to plat applications, and this is the only one that's been denied. Now, further in this instance, aside from the proposed 50-foot non-conforming lot width, the city staff found that the proposed project in the revert to plat meets zoning development standards. However, in analyzing the non-conforming lot width issue, the MPB looked at, I believe, only 5 lots to come up with the conforming to non-conforming ratio. Now, while this analysis would seem technically permissible under the Land Development Code, we would submit that the analysis does not serve the spirit and intent of the code in comparing similarly situated properties surrounding Delaney Park. If an analysis of the similarly situated properties is considered, the ratio of conforming to non-conforming would be met at 51% non-conforming. If left to stand, the MPB's denial will leave my clients no economically feasible alternative other than to construct a single build-to-suit structure of up to 6,000 square feet. This is not what my clients want to do or to see happen in Delaney Park. Rather, Mr. Ori, who has received the city's Historic Preservation Award for Best Preservation in 2013, and he's a contender for the 2017 award, prefers to develop the lot in a manner that preserves the historical integrity of the neighborhood and surrounding the park, and in a manner whereby the city would be able to exert extensive size and design control over the project. Thus, based on the information that I've presented in my letter and here today, as well as what you're going to hear from Mr. Ori, on behalf of my clients, we respectfully urge the council to overturn the MPB's denial of the revert to plat application, or to otherwise remand it back to the board with instructions to reconsider same. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have a appearance request from Mr. Ori, but he certainly. Okay. Come on up, though.
Hello, and thank you for your time. I've met many of you. I know some of you. My name's Keith Ori. I am a local builder. I was, as she said, the recipient of the 2013 Historic Preservation Award for Best Preservation. I am a 15-year resident of Delaney Park. I have remodeled probably 10 houses in Delaney Park, including the one that won the Historic Preservation Award. We had purchased this lot with the intent of doing a revert to plat. When we spoke to the staff regarding regarding our plan, they explained that the way they determine if they're going to support approval or denial of a revert to plat is simple as a simple statistical analysis of the block it's on. Rather, the number of houses on that block, a majority of the number of houses on that block are on a 50-foot lot, or if they're not. Unfortunately, because this block fronts Delaney Park, and the existing structure, or the subject structure as well as corner structures cannot be included, there's only 5 houses on that street that could be considered. Now, as Amanda said, while that meets the technical definition of their obligation, it's hard to imagine that supports the spirit of it. The broader neighborhood, and as far as being statistically valid, I think it would be hard to demonstrate that's a statistically valid sample. A broader statistical sample of the 7 streets immediately surrounding Delaney Park, including, without cherry picking and going by the exact same standard, removing corner properties from the equation, yields a 51% 50-foot lot ratio to non-50-foot lots. So let me see. I sort of jumped into the middle of what I was going to talk about. Okay, so when we had our MPB meeting, the board was swayed by a next door neighbor who had recently moved to Delaney Park and had circulated a petition among people that were at the Delaney Park ball field during the games that were going on there. Since that time, we've spoken to a number of the people that were part of that petition. One of them, Mr. Rusty Rogers, wrote a letter explaining that it wasn't fully explained what the purpose of the petition was, and that he's changed his mind in the interim. The thing is, just from a personal level, I live in Delaney Park, and I build these houses. And I want to build 2 modest-sized structures, houses that are consistent with the neighborhood. We've seen a couple houses in the neighborhood, one on Gore Street and one on Lake Davis, that are wildly outsized for the neighborhood. They're 4,000, or the one in Lake Davis is 11,000 square feet. We're talking about putting up 2 houses that would be held to the standard of a modified FAR of .43, or just 2,600 square feet. As you know, if you do a revert to plat, the city gets to exercise both design and size controls in the property that otherwise don't exist. In the absence of the approval, we have to, for economic reasons, we have to put the house up for sale. It's currently on the MLS, offering to build to suit, where a potential buyer could put a house, have us build a house for up to 6,000 square feet. I don't want to do that, but financially, I don't have a choice, because we have to do something with the lot. There has to be an outcome. So, because the sample size was, I think, inconsistent with the spirit of the regulations, and because the rejection of the revert to plat was unprecedented. There were 9 revert to plats that in the last year, both before ours and after ours, and many of them non-conforming as well. They were all approved. We lost by a 4-3 margin. We want to do the right thing for Delaney Park. We want to build a house that is consistent with the neighborhood, that's appealing, and is modest in size. That's what we're asking for the opportunity for.
Okay, thank you. Dean, could you come give us staff perspective here?
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. These revert to plat cases are all very different. While there may be 9 other cases similar to this application, the board and staff look at each case on a case-by-case basis. And even within a neighborhood, there are blocks that vary from block to block in terms of their predominant character. The applicant is correct. The block face faces the lake and the park, so there's only the 5 houses on this block in question. The technical analysis as prescribed by the code yielded that there's only 1 lot on that block face that is 50 feet. All the others have been combined to exceed the 55 feet or more, so that this revert to plat would result in 2 lots being created that do not meet the lot width requirement of the code. The code requires 55 feet in width. These 2 proposed lots would be 50 feet as originally platted. I think the board heard the testimony. Staff had recommended denial from day 1. We're standing by our recommendation to deny, but the council certainly has a right to do what it wishes to do.
Commissioner Sheehan.
And Mayor, as the commissioner of this district, and I represent more than just this one property. I represent, of course, the entire neighborhood, and the concern is, as it has been across my district, that economic, the desire to make money has superseded the desire to create neighborhoods, and it's not in the best interest of planning to create an economic profit for developers by bending the rules, so to speak. It's to make sure that we build things that are in size, mass, and scale with neighborhoods. And the neighbors have said they would prefer a larger house that they don't think would, I don't like this threat of, well, I'll just build a huge, huge house if I don't get the lot split that I want. I think that we need to look at, as we have in other neighborhoods and other districts, what is the lot width as we go forward with these, with the zoning, which is appropriate. And I don't agree with, well, I can't make any money, so you have to make a substandard lot size. I don't agree with that. I haven't agreed with that in Colonial Town. I haven't agreed with that in other parts of my district. I would prefer to have, especially in R1, we've already kind of given up R2, and I've had huge problems with large scale, out of control development that has gotten to the point where neighbors are fighting with one another, there's no place to park cars, it's ridiculous, and we're already going to have to deal with that under duplex, new duplex rules. The last thing I want to do is now take this problem that we have in R2 with overdevelopment and put that into our R1 neighborhoods. At least with R1, we have minimum lot sizes. Now, Commissioner Stewart, you've had a lot of these pressures too. The last thing I want to do is start, rolling back and saying, okay, we're going to allow whatever development that people want, that developers want, and not pay attention to what the neighborhoods are concerned with in terms of overdevelopment of their neighborhoods. So, again, I'd rather have one big house than two smaller houses and have all the parking and other issues that are associated with it, because I've had these problems throughout my district with overdevelopment. And I think our code, I think you all have done a good job in applying the code in this case. Mr. Ori might not agree with me, but the bottom line is it's not my job as a city commissioner to make sure someone can make a profit. My job is to make sure, and our job as a city council, is to make sure that the size, mass, and scale of development is appropriate to neighborhoods.
Okay, Commissioner, then if there's no motion to move that off of the consent agenda, it'll remain on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, I have no further requests for appearance cards, so we will go to commissioners on the consent agenda. Guess what, Commissioner Gray? You're first up today.
I have no comments, sir.
Commissioner Ortiz,
None on the consent.
how about anything else?
Well, I'd like to take advantage, I guess, of this opportunity. And in lieu of the tragedy that we just endured, I'd like to either the police department or our staff to lead a small commission to study the possibility of developing legislation to require clubs and certain events to have a number of off-duty police officers and firefighters, if the case may be, based on the amount of people in attendance. So that's something I would like to explore as soon as possible.
Commissioner, there's a downtown nightlife task force. I think that's the name of it. But anyways, they are currently commissioned and are looking at nightlife in the downtown and surrounding areas. So that's an appropriate place for that to be aired.
Can we include the whole city when it comes to the decision making in that particular?
Well, I think currently it's for the downtown area, but citywide. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Stewart.
Mayor, I don't have anything except I've got something I want to share during my time with the commission as a whole, and that's all I have.
Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor, and I have nothing until 2 o'clock.
Commissioner Hill.
I have nothing, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Ings.
Yeah, I know you ain't want to call my name.
Just be mindful, we have another meeting at 2 o'clock.
All right, so I can filibuster until then, right? No, I don't have anything, man.
Okay. And we will appropriately recognize Commissioner Sheehan's birthday at 2 o'clock. All right. We stand adjourned until 2 o'clock.